All right, we should be all set up then. So jumping into this presentation, we of course are offering this grant through the Montana Department of Agriculture. Our mission here is to protect producers and consumers and to enhance and develop agriculture and the allied industries. I personally am in the Ag Development Division, so mostly the second part of that mission statement is what we're going to talk about here, enhancing and developing agriculture and allied industries in the state. We're here to talk about the Crop Block Grant Program. This is a federal program created through the Farm Bill. It's been around since about 2006 in this format. And the purpose of this grant is to solely enhance the competitiveness of specialty crops. Again, because we are working through the Montana Department of Agriculture here, we're looking at that pretty exclusively in Montana. There is some possibility for crossing state lines. Again, we're looking at mostly promoting specialty crops in the state of Montana, and helping out producers is an important part of this grant. And my slideshow is stuck here. We have, through this grant program, and again for folks who are jumping on the line, we have the lines muted. If you have questions, you can type those in the chat box. I'll try to answer those as we go. Otherwise, we'll unmute the lines at the end, and you can all ask questions then. For funding available through this grant, we have about $1.3 million available to Montana. We take a small piece of that to pay for my salary to be here and manage the grant, and the rest of it we intend to award out to projects throughout the state. This is about the same as what we had last year, and last year we were able to make 14 grants ranging from a little over $30,000 to as high as $250,000. This is a federal pass-through grant, so that means that if you are awarded funds through this grant, you have to manage them as though they are federal funds, because they effectively are, in spite of the fact that they come through Montana Department of Agriculture. And as with any other federal grant, that means there's a lot of rules and a lot of complication to trying to manage these funds. So eligibility for this grant. As far as entities that are allowed to apply, the rules are pretty loose as far as that goes. Nonprofit, for-profit, state government, producers, universities, tribal governments, federal government, all those sorts of things are eligible to apply. The one thing that you can't do is apply for a project that benefits only your organization. So again, this goes back to the federal rules that apply to this grant. We can't say make a grant to a producer to, plant an orchard on their farm without doing anything to educate the public with that. There has to, through these grants, be an effort to spread the information you learn or to promote the industry as a whole. It can't just benefit you. You can't say, I'm a cherry grower, I want to have a roadside stand, I'm going to apply for a grant for a roadside stand. We have other grant programs that could help you with an idea like that, but this is not the one. Because these are, the one thing that we will look at when folks apply for these grants is that your organization does have to have some level of sophistication in order to be able to manage federal funds. That means you're going to have a pretty serious accounting system, one where you can track funding sources and spending by different accounts or different sources of revenue. You're going to have to be in good standing with the federal government. This is something we check before we accept your application into the review process, is that your organization can't have been suspended or debarred from receiving federal funds, nor can any of the significant employees within your organization have been be in poor standing with the federal government. And that doesn't mean that if you've never worked with federal funds, you can't apply for this grant. You definitely can apply for this grant if you have not managed federal funds. If you have a strong organization and you have the accounting systems in place to manage a federal grant, as determined by me, we can work with you, and we will. We may, though, put in some extra restrictions, like I might come down and visit your project a little bit more often than I would any other project, just to make sure everything's staying on track and that we're meeting all the rules of the federal government. We may also do some extra training if you've not managed federal funds before. So, knowing that most organizations are able to apply, just given the fact that, besides the fact that you need to have some ability to manage federal funds, the types of crops you can apply for through this grant are specialty crops, indicated in the name, specialty crop block grant. So specialty crops are fruits, vegetables, dried fruits, horticulture, and nursery crops. It's fairly broad in that. The one thing that is in the regulations is that the crop must be intensively cultivated, and it must be used for people. So that means, you can't grow pulses intended for, you can't grow lentils intended for animal feed and have that project funded through this grant. Crops that aren't allowable under this grant: grains, oilseed crops, bioenergy crops, forages, field crops, and plants federally controlled as illegal drug crops. That would be your marijuana and coca. We can't do those. Don't ask, because there's not any flexibility on that. What I will say is that one additional point in here is that for something like huckleberries that are typically grown wild and harvested from wild populations, if there's any type of management applied to those crops, if they're managed, monitored, and documented to ensure long-term sustainability, then we can make a case that those are allowable. So it doesn't strictly have to be something grown in a, in rows on your property. There's some, if you have some type of plant that you want to work with and you can make a compelling case that cultivation happens there, then we can try to work with that project. Also, projects focused on adding value to specialty crops. If you're going to take fruits and look at methods for preserving or processing those, or any type of value-added projects, those are all fine as long as the end product you're working with is at least 50% specialty crop by weight. That's USDA language. So we have that out there too. We do actually quite a few value-added types of projects. So on this slide here, if you're following along online, you can see a list of some eligible crops, some ineligible crops. Not really much reason to go through them at length. You can see that there's, is a fairly clear distinction when you think fruits and vegetables is most of what you're working with, and then nursery crops and things like that. This is obviously not a complete list. If you want a complete list or more complete list, you can go to the website listed on the screen here. You can, if you look up specialty crop block grant, you can find the federal page right on the front page there. In fact, we can probably just look at it. There is a link where you can get more information on that, and you can see that's the link here on the specialty crop page. That's the definition of a specialty crop. So that's more thorough than what you're going to find here on the listed here. It's not all inclusive. If there's a crop that you think should be counted as a specialty crop, it's not on any of the lists you check, contact me, and I can pass that question along to USDA, and we can go from there. Usually they're really quick to respond as to whether or not something is a specialty crop or a non-specialty crop. Another point on this list is that sometimes a crop is going to be both by USDA's definition of specialty crop and a non-specialty crop. So one example that we had come up last year is sunflowers. If you're growing sunflowers for oil, or to use as an oil seed, those are not allowable. So we couldn't work with a project developing markets for sunflower oil. If you're growing sunflowers for aesthetic purposes, or if you're growing them for human consumption, then those are projects we can work with. So there's some fine lines in there. And again, if you run into a situation like that, if you're not sure, I encourage you really, before you get too far into the process, just give me a call and or email, and we'll work through that. So USDA this year is implementing a list of performance measures. Performance measures and federal grants, usually they come from the Office of Management and Budget, and they're a means by which we try to calculate the entire value of a grant program to report back to the U.S. Congress, who of course are responsible for the funding for these projects. So the types of projects they're looking for, you can derive that from what they've done in their performance measures are listed here. And they're looking to enhance the competitiveness of specialty crops through increased sales, increased consumption. What I'll say about those two is that USDA AMS is really pushing to have this program do more with the marketing of specialty crops. The unique part about this program that doesn't really exist in other USDA programs is that we can promote the sales of specialty crops. That's unlike, of course, the Specialty Crop Research Initiative, which doesn't really promote sales. So that's really the wheelhouse right now, or the directive we're getting from USDA is to work more on increasing sales, increasing consumption, and measure the dollar figures that you can impact farmers with. Increased access and awareness and some sustainable practice stuff. You all can read that on this next slide. It gets more into the more scientific type projects that they're looking for. A note I will make here is that because you are applying to Montana Department of Agriculture, it's important that whatever project you're going to propose, of course we want to meet the USDA guidelines, but you also have to consider that we're here as the Department of Agriculture to promote producers or to support producers, food producers, plant producers in the state of Montana. So when you're thinking about your grant application, think about how what you want to do is going to help producers. Doesn't mean that's your sole focus. I mean, you can still be about getting food into schools, but tie it back to producers, because that's what we want to hear at Montana Department of Agriculture. And this list that we've looked at of these guidelines from USDA, this isn't the entire list. There are subcategories within each of these. If you look at some of the introducing people to increased consumption measures, they have increased consumption of youth, increased consumption by adults, increased consumption by a couple other groups there. It gets fairly specific, but these are the broad ideas that USDA is asking us to try to fit projects on. All right, priorities. So in addition, at the state level, we are required by federal law to develop a list of priorities for this Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. We're required to consult stakeholders in doing so. So a couple months back, we held a meeting. We got a group of folks from across the state. We held it publicly, and we came up with a list of priorities of what what folks think are the most important issues facing specialty crops in Montana. With that list developed, we of course publish it in the call for proposals that you all have seen online, and we take that list, and that list is used by the Director of Montana Department of Agriculture in making decisions on what projects are actually funded. So there's a couple steps to the funding decision-making process. The first is going to be a review by a committee of stakeholders, and they're going to score your application. After that, it goes to the Director of Montana MDA. He's going to take those scores by the review committee and the list of priorities we're about to look at, and between those, he'll look at the project and he will determine which ones are sent to USDA. So the priorities don't affect how your application is scored, but it may affect how they're ranked. And the director could say that food safety is an especially high priority for the state of Montana. Food safety and complying with GAP and FSMA regulations, and that might move your project ahead of another project, assuming they're comparable in score. Overall, we're going to fund the best projects. It doesn't matter necessarily if you've met one of the priorities. What's most important is that you present a compelling need that your project is going to address, and you present a compelling solution that you're going to apply to that need. 99 times out of 100, those are the projects that are going to be funded, the ones that are compelling and the ones that address an important need. So the priorities for the grant program in Montana: providing farmer education on specialty crops, farm to institution practices, value-added production, disease and pest management, farm and food safety, commercial seed production, organic and non-organic food production, and the use of beneficial organisms. Supporting research in the area of specialty crops, disease and pest control, variety testing and selection, organic and non-organic food production, and the use of beneficial organisms. You can see there's a number of things where we want to see education going on for the public, and we want to see the research being done as well. Infrastructure. Planning and supporting infrastructures that create or support specialty crops. Storage, processing, farm to institute, and pest management assistance for farmers. Important to note here is that this grant is not very easy to use to buy infrastructure. There are large significant needs for infrastructure to support the specialty crop industry in Montana. We want to use this grant however we can to help that need. But the one thing we can't do is buy, the way I've heard it explained, is anything that connects to the ground. We can't, build you a new processing facility for pulses. We can't build you storage bins for whatever crop you're looking for. We can't build a root cellar in your organization. We can't buy you a freezer for your kitchen facility. We can't help you plan all that. We can help you do the legwork of getting that figured out. We just can't pay for those items because of language in the federal regulations. And the last two priorities we have are increasing consumer awareness of the value of specialty crops through education, and we want to see projects representing a geographic diversity across the state. We want to try to, even though a large part of or most of us think about specialty crop production maybe in the northwestern part of the state with cherries and all the vegetable farms through Gallatin and Flathead and Missoula counties. We want to see projects in eastern Montana trying to help out that part of the state. And that is honestly a lot of the reason why we get the funding for this project is because of the lentils and peas and chickpeas that are being grown out there. All right, grant proposals. So we've had this opportunity posted since December 21st. Applications are going to be due February 24th at 2 p.m. We're not going to accept anything after that deadline. If your application comes in at 2:01, we're not going to accept it. That's the rule. That's how it's going to be. It's just a matter of fairness to everybody who's trying to apply for this grant. The only time there's ever going to be an exception to that is if you can show us that technical difficulties led to you missing that deadline. And that means communicating with me very early on before the deadline. We're not going to, if you tell me you had technical difficulties after the deadline is passed, we're not going to take your application. You need to verbalize your technical difficulties before the due date so that we can document that and we can accept your application then potentially after the deadline. So once applications are in, we're going to do a screening of those. Anything that doesn't comply with the intent of the grant or the laws, federal or state, we're going to take out of competition. You'll get a letter regarding that after we make that decision. Anything else, you'll be notified that your grant will be included, your application will be included in a review meeting to take place tentatively, very tentatively, March 22nd. And the grant review meeting will be in Helena. It is open to the public. You will not have the opportunity to give presentations, but you can certainly be in the room. We'll do public comment before, after, and probably someplace in the middle of the meeting. If you as an applicant have any comments, that's your opportunity to make your voice heard. Hopefully shortly after that grant review meeting, we will take the results to the Director of Montana Department of Agriculture. He will make a decision what appears in our state plan. The state plan is what we send to USDA. That's the last step at the state level, is the director finalizing that state plan. At that point, I package up the state plan and I send it to USDA, and the USDA gets to make the final call. They'll typically come back with a number of questions that we'll have to address working with you. The state plan that we send to USDA is effectively Montana Department of Agriculture's application for those funds. That said, we still need your input as the applicant to answer the questions that USDA comes up with. We then, after that is submitted, have a long wait with a bunch of questions in the middle until the very last second in September, when we find out if we will receive the funding we've applied for. Again, we have $1.3 million that we're entitled to apply for. Effectively, if we put together a package of applications that amounts to $1.3 million, we expect all of that funding to be awarded to Montana. So again, the very end of September, then September 30th, the last possible second, we'll get notified from USDA of that funding. On October 1, regardless of whether we have contracts finished with you guys or anything else, any other details that are still in the works, if your application is approved by USDA, you're entitled to start spending funds October 1. You'll get that in writing from me if your application is selected for funding. There's no reason that because we do these as reimbursement grants, that you can't start work on October 1 and start incurring funds, because you're entitled to that reimbursement from me. And then as far as an end date, the end date on these grants will be, I hope I'm doing the math right in my head, I didn't double check, this is June 30, 2019. That does leave us a cushion at the end if a project isn't done at that time. It's possible to do an extension of up to 3 months, but right now, when you write your application, you need to write it with an end date in June. So all the materials that you'll use to apply are available on scbg.mt.gov. We're only going to accept applications that come in on the materials posted online. You'll see these Appendix A, B, and C on the website under the application materials. That's where you need to fill out your application. This first form, I admit, is a little bit obnoxious, the applicant self-assessment form. It is part of our requirements. It's not a requirement necessarily, but it's strongly recommended by the federal government that a grantor like Montana Department of Agriculture perform a pre-award risk assessment of grantees. So you fill out that form, and that's what I use to make a determination as to whether your organization can manage federal funds. So again, I apologize in advance for when you have to complete that form, but it's just part of how it works. Next thing, there's the application template. That's your grant narrative. And then there's the budget template. You've got an Excel work there so you can get your budget into a format that we need it in for submitting to USDA. Once you get all this done, once you fill out all those materials, you do those, you have them saved on your computer, you're going to submit those through fundingmt.org. That's our online grant management portal. If you scroll down from all those application materials there, this is the information you need to, this should guide you through getting your stuff uploaded to FundingMT. You're going to have to go to fundingmt.org. You're going to have to sign up for an account. I will presumably approve your account, get you all set up with your organization, and that's how you'll go about applying. These appendices here that we're asking you to submit, those are the only materials we want to see. Don't submit letters of intent. If you do submit not letters of intent, but letters of support, anything like that, we're going to throw them away. They'll never make it to a reviewer. They'll come out in the screening process. That's all there is to it. Close out of here. We'll just click through to the Funding Montana website. This is our web grants management system. Again, this is all in the instructions, but you can register down here for an account, and once you get that all set up, you can log in through here, and that's where you'll upload your documents to submit to me. And here is just a list of those materials that we're asking you to turn in to apply for this grant. There is, in addition to the 3 documents online, there's a little bit of contact information we'll ask you to fill out in the web grant system. That's just part of it helps with our tracking if we can have that information put into the computer system. If there's anything you run into trouble with, either finding forms, managing your account on Funding Montana, you can email me at scbg@mt.gov. You can also find my phone number on the website. You can give me a quick call. If it's a technical question, I'd ask that you email me, or if it's with regard to your grant application, I'd ask that you email me, just because we're going to post everything in an FAQ online, and if we document it through an email, it's a little bit easier for me to get that posted online. If it's a quick question about getting around in web grants, just give me a phone call. I can probably talk you through it just as easily. But budgeting for your project. We're not going to accept any applications for less than $30,000. That's just a matter of management on our end that we'll get. If we start funding anything much smaller than that, it gets to be too many grants for one person to manage. There's no maximum amount on the grant. I mean, bear in mind that we do expect to make multiple grants out of this 1.3 million we have available. There is no match requirement, and match is not a competitive factor in competing in these grants. It doesn't. I mean, usually we'll recommend that folks not put in match in their grants. And that's not because we don't understand that you need additional funding to manage these projects. It's because it's just, if you're reported on a federal form or on a form for a federal grant, it's just one more layer of management we have to add to these grants. Where that's going to be an exception is if you're going to have program income generated from your grant. Then we're going to have to talk about how we're going to report that, and it's going to look a lot like reporting match. So we're not going to get into the program income thing on this presentation. It's complicated and generally best to avoid it just for simplicity's sake. When folks ask how much money should they apply for, the only answer we can really give is to say that you should budget enough money to do your project effectively. Don't come in thinking that, and this seems to happen a lot with nonprofits, I would say, is that you come in thinking that you have to pinch every penny to try to get this grant application approved. That's not how we try to think about it around here. We want you to apply to do the project as well as you can do it. And so if it's going to take, like I said, our biggest grant last year was $250,000. That's fine if that's what it takes to really get the job done, and if it's really a compelling need that you're going to fix, we'd rather spend the money to do it right than try to pinch pennies. If you need to, because there's going to be a higher emphasis than previous years with this grant on showing the effectiveness of your grant. If you need to budget for an evaluation of your project, go ahead and do so. If you need an evaluator to come in year 3 and say, here was the problem, here's the solution we applied, was it effective, and you need an outside person to do that, go ahead and budget for it. It's going to be critically important to the continuation of this funding for the state and for the nation, for that matter, that we demonstrate good impact from these projects. So spend the money where you need to, if that's what has to happen to demonstrate impact. We are, lastly on this slide, we're not in a position to allow indirect cost on this grant. So I understand that that's hard for you guys, and we've looked at ways to try to do that, and there's not a practical way, and that that funding that would be used, could be used for indirect, also needs to be used for the management of the grant at the state level. That said, we either have a project that's not managed and we let you have indirect, or we try to manage this project effectively so we can keep the money coming into the state and are not able to offer indirect. This slide has a list of the allowable costs on this grant. This is pretty standard stuff for federal grants. As you can see, bolded and underlined there, special purpose equipment. So first off, equipment is anything over $5,000 that has more than a 1-year lifetime. Special purpose means that, I have the definition here, special purpose equipment means equipment which is used only for research, medical, scientific, or other technical activities. Examples of special purpose equipment include microscopes, X-ray machines, surgical instruments, and spectrometers. And that, as I said earlier, is really hard to work around. If you're in, a university setting, there's obviously a number of things that you can purchase. If you're working on a farm, it gets a little bit harder. There's, we're waiting for the opportunity to maybe make a good case about some piece of, farm equipment that it fits the need for in the name of special purpose. But right now, all I can say is that it's really hard to find that fit. So, you might, if you're looking at something that needs equipment or a capital expenditure, you're probably going to have to look elsewhere. There is some track record for things like hoop houses getting funded through this grant. But typically, folks are doing that for less than $5,000. Communication costs are fine. Foreign travel is fine. If you're inclined that your project's going to take foreign travel, it's easier for you to say that now in your application than it is to add foreign travel later. Adding foreign travel to the grant later is going to take approval from USDA. So if you think you need to, go to India to visit pulse crop processors, write it into the application. It's easier to change it to domestic travel than it is to change domestic travel to foreign. Materials and supplies, meetings and conferences are all allowable. Meetings and conferences can be tricky, but it's not a deal breaker if you have that in there and we have to fix it later. Publications and printing costs, we actually would encourage you to include some publication or printing costs in there. One of the goals of this grant is to get information out to the public. So if you need to publish your results somewhere, if you want to print them off, put them on a website, absolutely budget to do so. Put in web development, put in what you need, but be sure that we can make the compelling case that you're educating the public about the work you're doing. Rental costs of buildings and equipment. Sometimes what happens is that you need a chipper for your wood chipper for your project, and the one you want costs $6,000. You're just going to have to go down and rent one from the rental store, and if that ends up costing more than $5,000, that's just an inefficiency that's built into these grants. Training and travel costs, both fine. Not allowable costs. All right, advertising and public relations both appear up here on both lists. There is on that website for applying for this grant a list of allowable and unallowable costs. Read that carefully about advertising and public relations. The short story is that you can promote an industry, but you can't promote a business. So you could say, eat Montana apples, not I grow Montana apples, buy mine. So it's sort of a blurry line there, and another critical point on there is that you can't do like a eat local campaign. You can do an eat local fruits and vegetables campaign, but it can't. It needs to be specifically fruits and vegetables or whatever specialty crop. Eat Montana lentils, but you can't do eat Montana food. And that goes back to the solely enhancing specialty crops idea. Alcoholic beverages, you're not allowed to spend money on alcohol under a federal grant unless your project is producing alcohol from a specialty crop. Then you could potentially make a case that that's an allowable expense. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. I hope so. Watch out for the airfare thing. If you're going to put in an airfare cost, check online and get multiple quotes. USDA checks on and gets multiple quotes for your airfare, and it's kind of it's sort of painful to have to answer those questions when USDA calls us out on them. Again, you're not allowed to buy special purpose equipment. You can't buy a tractor. You can't buy a truck. You can't buy a storage bin, that sort of stuff. Don't do any lobbying or political activities. And again, we can't allow indirect costs on this grant. So there's 4 basic steps to, once you get your budget, your narrative, and all that other stuff submitted, there's 4 steps to reviewing that application. First off, me and a team of folks around here are going to review for compliance. Means we check if you're in good standing with the federal government. We make sure that all the expenses you're looking at are allowable. We make sure that the project focuses solely on specialty crops. Anything outside of that, we're going to disqualify your application if you can't meet some basic criteria. We'll notify you of those issues in writing. There is an ability to appeal those if you feel like you've been wronged. It goes to our legal team and management here. But most of the time it's going to be, we hope that it's pretty straightforward if we do have to remove something in screening. The next step is that March 22nd meeting where we're going to have a team of reviewers to look at your application. Again, it's a public meeting. They're going to look at they're going to score every application. And that leads to step 3, where we hand everything to the director of the Department of Agriculture. Director DeYoung will then look at the scores, look at the priorities, look at the applications, and decide what goes in the state plan. State plan goes to USDA. USDA makes the final approval. I've said this already before, but again, there's a public review meeting. You're totally entitled to attend. We're not going to give you a chance to present your application, but you may speak during public comment. It's fine if you want to be in the room for your application, for everybody else's application. There's no rules about that, just that you can't speak or interrupt the meeting outside of public comment. If someone does interrupt the meeting, we're entitled to ask you to leave the meeting. And but otherwise it's totally open. If you have any other questions, here's my contact information. Again, my name is Jim Auer, Specialty Crop Block Grant Coordinator, and you can reach me at 5424 or scbg@mt.gov. Then we're going to do one more technical assistance call. I'm not going to prepare a PowerPoint for that one. You guys can call in if folks have questions. We'll record the call. I'll answer your questions there as best as I can, and we'll post that online as well. The questions, the answers, and probably the presentation. So with that all said, if folks have questions, I'm ready to take those, and let me find the unmute button. All right, everybody should be unmuted now. If folks have questions, go ahead and jump in.
Hi, Jim. It's David Bombauer in Bozeman, Montana.
Hi.
I have a question. I'm working on Appendix B. There's a section there on objectives, and there's a little box at the very end. It says objective target. Could you expand on what that actually means?
That is a new box that got added this year. I would think of it sort of as an outcome. If your objective is to educate Montanans about bee diseases, then I would put in there how many Montanans you expected to educate. What I would say is that I don't think that that's going to be a question that is going to make or break a proposal in the review, and it's something that we would work with after an application is approved. So just think about outcomes, if we're going to do this, what do we expect the outcome of that to be, and try to write your target that way, or your outcome that way.
And this one's a little more technical because I noticed the form got revised after it was initially posted in December.
Right.
And so after the revision, for whatever reason, that area focus box, the different areas are not highlighted, and at least on a couple different machines I've tried, I've not been able to check any of those boxes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's something I'm doing, but I've actually shared it with a couple other people, and so if you could take a look at that and just make sure that everything's active on your end. But I couldn't select areas.
Okay. I will have a look at that when I get a minute. I don't know what's going on here. All right. I'm making a note to myself to go look at that.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else out there? All right. I'm not hearing anybody. We do have, USDA does provide a couple other examples, or provide examples of allowable versus unallowable projects. I included these slides in here. Folks are not certainly required to stick around for this part, but examples of allowable and unallowable projects, it mostly comes down to making sure that your project reaches a broad audience and doesn't just benefit your organization. So again, this example here on the screen, you can't promote XYZ Corp. You can promote apples, and XYZ Corp may grow apples, but you can't promote an organization. It's got to be promoting a crop, promoting some kind of practice, something that benefits especially crop industry broadly. It's possible for a small farm or for a farm to apply on their own, but what you're going to want to think about is how you're going to, if you're going to apply to try turf grass on your farm, think about how you're going to share the information about your turf grass trials. More often than not, if an individual farm calls in and wants to do something, I'm going to tell them to call their extension agent and see if they can work out a deal where extension will help them one, set up the experiment they want to do, and two, to share that information publicly. So an example here would be if you're a group of growers, you can certainly, if you represent a group of growers, you can promote that group. An example is Western Montana Growers Co-op. They've been recipients of a number of these awards, and by the fact that they represent 40 farmers or 40 individual farms or 40 or so individual farms, they're able to, do quite a bit of work based on the fact that they represent a pretty large group of specialty crop farmers. You can't use federal funds as a general rule to make a profit on or outcompete your competitors. So don't go out there with a plan to, buy produce and undercut people at the farmers market. And again, this is another one. It's acceptable to do trials on your property as long as you share the information. You can't apply for funding to redesign your logo. Again, there are examples that go both ways. We were able to fund the development of the organic seed co-op here in the state. They designed the logo, but again, they represent a broad group of farmers all growing specialty crop seeds. And that's all I've got. So again, unless folks have more questions, I'm ready to wrap it up.
Sneak one more in?
Yeah.
So as ways of outreach of your results, field days seem to be popular, websites. Are there other things that the department's found to be a really effective vehicle to get the information out to the public?
Those are the big ones. Some of them are just by their nature public outreach kind of campaigns. We supported the Choose Local Fruits and Veggies initiative out of Lake County Community Development Corp. Obviously reached the public just by its own nature. Field days, yeah. The Montana, the Ag Live, the show that all the extension agents are always on, or the extension folks are always on. Conference presentations you can count towards your public outreach, and that's what we're looking for.
Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else out there, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the presentation. Thanks everyone for getting online. If anything pops up later, you think of more questions, you're totally encouraged to contact me through those means we talked about. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
So 4 people hung up.